All right, welcome to Project Florida. What's Florida? What's the story behind here? I was walking down the street the other day, and they got this little thing called a little library in town. People just drop off books there, pick them out. Well, there's about three or four books in there. There's two books by David Eddings that I'm excited about, but they're part of a longer series. And then there's this book here by Piers Anthony that is the first book in the Xanth novel in the Xanth series, and it's kind of special to me. It's called A Spell for Chameleon. So we're gonna get into that. Start reading that. We're gonna give it the old Morning Glory pesto treatment here. Chapter 1. Xanth. A small lizard perched on a brown stone, feeling threatened by the approach of human beings along the path. It metamorphosed into a stingray beetle, then into a stench puffer, then into a fiery salamander. Bink smiled. These conversions weren't real. It had assumed the forms of obnoxious little monsters, but not their essence. It could not sting, stink, or burn. It was a chameleon, using its magic to mimic creatures of genuine threat. Yet as it shifted into the form of a basilisk, it glared at him with such ferocity that Bink's mirth abated. If its malice could strike him, he would be horribly dead. Then abruptly, a silent hawk moth swooped down from the sky and caught the chameleon in its beak. There was a thin scream of anguish as the lizard convulsed. Then it dangled limply as the hawk ascended. The moth hawk, by the way. The chameleon, despite all its pretensions, was dead. Even while trying to threaten Bink, it had been destroyed by another agency. This realization continued to percolate through Bink's emotion. The chameleon was harmless, but most of unattained Xanth was not. Was this some twisted omen? A small suggestion of a dire fate awaiting him? Omens were a serious business. They always came true, but usually were misinterpreted until too late. Was Bink fated to die brutally, or was some enemy of his? He had, so far as he knew, no enemies. The golden sun of Xanth shone through the magic shield, striking sparkles from the trees. All plants had their enchantments, but no spell could eliminate the need for light, water, and healthy soil. Instead, magic was used to make these necessities of the vegetable kingdom more available, and to protect the plants from destruction, unless they were overpowered by stronger magic or some simple bad luck, like the chameleon. Bink looked at the girl beside him as she stepped through a slanting sunbeam. He was no plant, but he too had needs, and even the most casual inspection of her made him aware of this. Sabrina was absolutely beautiful, and her beauty was completely natural. Other girls managed to enhance their appearance by cosmetics, or padding, or specialized spells. But besides Sabrina, all other females looked somewhat artificial. She was no enemy. I have no idea what he means there by she was no enemy. I guess maybe a chameleon's disguising itself. I don't know. But a fun little note here. He keeps y'all can't see it, but those like long pauses I keep taking, he's using that like extended hyphen things that AI is getting flack for, but he wrote this like years and years ago, which is kind of funny. Anyway, They came to Lookout Rock. This was not a particularly lofty promontory, but its situational magic made it seem more elevated than it was, so that they could look down on a quarter slice of Xanth. This was the land of multicolored vegetation, small pretty lakes, and deceptively quiet fields of flowers, ferns, and crops. Even as Bing watched, one of the lakes expanded slightly, making itself seem cooler and deeper, a better place for a swim. Bink wondered briefly about this, as he often did. He had an unruly mind, which constantly pestered him with questions for which there were no ready answers. As a child, he had driven parents and friends almost to distraction with his, "Why is the sun yellow? Why do ogres crunch bones? Why can't sea monsters cast spells?" And similarly infantile prattle. No wonder he had soon been hustled away to centaur school. Now he had learned to control his mouth, but not his brain, and so he let it run on in silence. Animate spells he could understand, such as those of the unfortunate chameleon. They facilitated comfort, survival, or image for living creatures. But why should inanimate things have magic? Did a lake care who swam in it? Well, maybe so. A lake was an ecological unit, and the community of living things within it might have a mutual interest in promoting it. Or a freshwater dragon might be responsible, luring in its prey. Dragons were the most varied and dangerous life forms of Xanth. Species occupied air, earth, and water, and a number breathed fire. One thing they all had in common: good appetite. Pure chance might not bring in enough fresh meat. But what about Lookout Rock? It was bare, without even lichen, and hardly beautiful. Why should it want company? And if it did, why not make itself more handsome instead of remaining gray and drab? People do not come here to admire the rock, but to admire the rest of Xanth. Such a spell seems self-defeating. Then Bink stubbed his toe on a sharp fragment of stone. He was standing on a cracked rock terrace, formed generations ago by the breaking up of a pretty colored boulder, and there it was. That was the other boulder, which must have been close to Lookout Rock and of similar size, had been fragmented to make this path and terrace, losing its identity. Lookout Rock had survived. Nobody would break it up because it would make an ugly path, and its unselfish magic made it useful as it stood. One minor mystery solved. Still, there were philosophical considerations. His insatiable mind insisted. How could an inanimate thing think or have feelings? What was survival to a rock? And a boulder was merely a fragment of a prior layer of rock. Why should it have a personal identity if the bedrock didn't? Still, the same question could be asked of a man. He had been formed from the tissues of the plants and animals he consumed, yet he had a separate. What did you wish to talk to me about, Bink? Sabrina inquired demurely. Oh, there he is. He's using that. Man, Pierce Anthony's ahead of his time, ain't he? As if she didn't know, but as his mind formed the necessary words, his mouth balked. He knew what her answer had to be. No one could remain in Xanth after his 25th birthday unless he had demonstrated a magic talent. Bink's own critical birthday was barely a month away. He was no child now. How could she marry a man who was so soon to be exiled? Why hadn't he thought of that before bringing her out here? He could only embarrass himself. Now he had to say something to her, or suffer further embarrassment, making it awkward for her as well. "I just wanted to see see my what?" She inquired with an arch lift of an eyebrow. He felt the heat starting up on his neck. Your holograph, he blurted. There was much more of her he longed to see and to touch, but that could only come after marriage. She was that sort of girl, and it was part of her appeal. The girls who had it didn't need to put it on casual display. Well, not quite true. He thought of Aurora, who certainly had it, yet who think there is a way, Sabrina said. He glanced sidelong at her, then quickly away, confused. She couldn't be suggesting the good magician Humphrey, she continued blithely. What? He had been on quite a different track. No credit to his willful mind. Humphrey knows 100 spells. Maybe one of them. I'm sure he could find out what your talent is. Then everything would be all right. Oh, but he charges a year's service for a single spell, Bink protested. I've only a month. But that was not quite accurate. If the magician identified a talent for Bink, he would not be exiled, and he would have a year available. He was not deeply touched by Sabrina's faith in him. She did not say what others said, that he had no magic. She did him the immense courtesy of choosing to believe that his magic merely remained undiscovered. Perhaps it was that faith that had first attracted him to her. Certainly she was beautiful and intelligent and talented, a prize by any definition. But she could have been much less in all categories and still been his. A year is not so long, Sabrina murmured. I would wait. Fink stared down at his hands, pondering. His right hand was normal, but he had lost the middle finger of his left hand in a childhood accident. It had not even been the result of inimical magic. He had been playing with a cleaver, holding down a stalk of coil grass while he chopped, pretending it was the tail of a dragon. After all, a boy could not start to practice too early for the serious side of life. The grass had twitched out of his grasp as he swung, and he had grabbed for it, and the cleaver had come down hard on his extended finger. It had hurt, but the worst of it was that because he was not supposed to play with the cleaver, he had not dared to scream or tell of his injury. He had controlled himself with extreme effort and suffered in silence. He had buried the finger and managed to hide his mutilation by keeping his hand closed for several days. When the truth finally came out, it was too late for a restorative spell. The finger was rotted and could not be reattached. A strong enough spell could have attached it, but it would have remained a zombie finger. He had not been punished. His mother, Bianca, believed he had learned his lesson, and he had. He had. Next time he played with the cleaver, on the sly he would watch where his fingers were. His father seemed privately pleased that Bink had shown so much courage and tenacity in adversity, even in his wrongdoing. The lad's got nerve, Roland had said. Now if only he had magic. Bink jerked his eyes away from the hand. That had been 15 years ago. Suddenly a year seemed short indeed. 1 year of service in exchange for a lifetime with Sabrina. It was a bargain. Yet, suppose he had no magic. Was he to pay a year of his life to verify the certainty of being thrust into the drear realm of the null talented? Or would it be better to accept exile, preserving the useless hope that he did have a latent talent? Sabrina, respecting his flurry of contemplation, began her holograph. A haze of blue appeared before her, hanging over the slope. It expanded, thinning at the edges, intensifying in the center, until it was 2 feet in diameter. It looked like thick smoke, but did not dissipate or drift. Now she began to hum. She had a good voice, Not a great one, but right for her magic. At the sound, the blue cloud quivered and solidified, becoming roughly spherical. Then she changed her pitch, and the outer rim turned yellow. She opened her mouth, singing the word girl, and the colors assumed the shape of a young lass in a blue dress with yellow frills. The figure was three-dimensional, visible from all sides with differing perspective. Pardon. It was a fine talent. Sabrina could sculpt anything, but the images vanished the moment her concentration stopped, and never had any physical substance. So this was, strictly speaking, useless magic. It did not improve her life in any material fashion. Yet how many talents really did help their people? One person could make a leaf of a tree wither and die as he looked at it. Another could create the odor of sour milk. Another could make insane laughter bubble up from the ground. These were all magic, no question about it. But what use were they? Why should such people qualify as citizens of Xanth while Bink, who was smart, strong, and handsome, was disqualified? Yet that was the absolute rule. No non magical person could remain beyond his quarter century mark. Sabrina was right. He had to identify his talent. He had never been able to find it on his own, so he should pay the good magician's price. Not only would this preserve him from exile, which really might be a fate worse than death, since what was the point of life without magic? And win him Sabrina, a fate considerably better than death. It would also redeem his battered self-respect. He had no choice. Oh, Sabrina exclaimed, clapping her hands to her pert derriere. The holograph dissolved, the blue-dressed girl distorting grotesquely before she vanished. I'm on fire! Fink stepped toward her, alarmed, but even as he moved, there was loud juvenile laughter. Sabrina whirled furiously. Numbo, you stop that, she cried. She was one of those girls who was appealing in anger as in joy. It's not funny. It was, of course. Numbo, who had given her a magical hot seat, a fiery pain in the posterior. Talk about a useless talent. Bink, his fist clenched so tightly that his thumb jammed into the stub of his missing finger, strode towards the grinning youth standing behind you Lookout Rock. Numbo was 15, cocky and annoying. He needed a lesson. But Bink's foot struck a loose rock, which turned his ankle long enough to cost him his balance. It didn't hurt, but interrupted his forward progress. His hand swung forward, and his fingers touched an invisible wall. There was another shout of laughter. Bink hadn't crashed headlong into the wall, thanks to the providential stone under his foot, but evidently someone thought he had. You too, Chilk, Sabrina said. That was Chilk's talent. The wall. It was a kind of compliment to Sabrina's talent. Instead of being visible without substance, it had substance without visibility. It was only 6 feet square, and like so many talents, it was strictly temporary, but it was hard as steel in the first few moments. Bink could dodge around it and run the kid down, but he was sure to get caught several times by that remanifesting wall and suffer more damage than he could do to the boy. It wasn't worth it. If only he had a talent of his own, such as Numbo's hot seat, he could make the Joker sorry regardless of the wall. But he didn't. And Chilk knew it. Everyone knew it. That was Bink's big problem. He was fair game for all the pranksters because he couldn't strike back, not magically. And it was deemed crass to do so physically. Right now, he was quite ready to be crass, however. Let's get out of here, Bink, Sabrina said. There was disgust in her voice, nominally directed at the intruders, but Bink suspected part of it applied to him. An impotent kind of rage began building up, one he had felt many times before and never gotten used to. He had been balked from proposing to her by the lack of talent, and he could not stay here for the same reason. Not here at Lookout Rock or here at Xanth because he didn't fit. They walked back down the path. The jokers, getting no further rise from their prey, went in search of other mischief. The landscape no longer seemed so lovely. Maybe he'd be better off away from here. Maybe he should take off now, not waiting to be officially exiled. If Sabrina really loved him, she'd come with him, even outside, into Mundania. No, he knew better than that. Sabrina loved him, but she loved Xanth too. She had such a sweet shape, such kissable lips, that she could find another man much more easily than she could adjust to the rigors of life among the unmagical. For that matter, he could find another girl more easily than what he faced. So probably, objectively, he'd be better off going alone. So why didn't his heart agree? They passed the brown stone where the chameleon had perched, and he shuddered. Why don't you ask Justin? Sabrina suggested as they approached the village. It was dusk, closing in faster here than up at Lookout Rock. The village lamps were coming on. Blink, glanced around at the unique tree she indicated. There are many kinds of trees in Xanth. A number of them vital to the economy. Beer barrel trees were tapped for drink, and oil barrel trees for fuel. And Bink's own footwear came from a mature shoe tree east of the village. But Justin tree was something special, a species never sprouted from seeds. Its leaves were shaped like flat hands, and its trunk was the hue of tanned human flesh. This was scarcely surprising, since it had once been a human. In an instant, that history flashed across Bink's mind, part of the dynamic folklore of Xanth. 20 years ago, there had been one of the greatest of the evil magicians, a young man named Trent. He had possessed the power of transformation, the ability to change any living thing into any other living thing, instantly. Not satisfied with the status of magician, granted in recognition of the awesome strength of his magic, Trent had sought to use his power to preempt the throne of Xanth. His procedure had been simple and most direct. He transformed anyone who opposed him into something that could not oppose him. The worst threats he converted to fish on dry land, allowing them to flop till they died. The mere nuisances he changed to animals or plants. Thus, several intelligent animals owed their status to him, though they were dragons, two-headed wolves, and land octopi. They retained the intelligence and perspective of their human origins. Trent was gone now, but his works remained, for there was no other transformer to change them back. Holographs, hot seats, and invisible walls were qualifying talents, but transformation was of a different order. Only once in a generation did such a power manifest in an individual, and it seldom manifested twice in the same form. Justin had been one of Magician Trent's annoyances. No one remembered exactly what he had done, so Justin was a tree. No one had the ability to change him back into a man. Justin's own talent had been voice projection, not the parlor trick that was ventriloquism, or the trivial talent of insane laughter, but the genuine, comprehensible utterance at a distance without the use of vocal cords. He retained his talent as a tree, and as he had a great deal of time for thought, villagers often came to this tree for advice. Often it was good advice. Justin was no genius, but a tree had greater objectivity about human problems. It occurred to Bink that Justin might actually be the better off as a tree than he had been as a man. He liked people, but it was said that in his human form he had not been handsome. As a tree, he was quite stately and no threat to anyone. They veered to approach Justin. Suddenly, a voice spoke directly in front of them. Do not approach, friends. Ruffians are lurking. Bink and Sabrina drew up short. Is that you, Justin? She asked. Who's lurking? But the tree could not hear as well as it could speak, and did not answer. Wood did not seem to make the best ears. Bink, angry, took a step toward it. Justin is public scenery, he muttered. Nobody has a right to. Bink, please, Bink, Sabrina urged, pulling back on his arm. We don't want any trouble. No, she never wanted any trouble. He would not go so far as to call this a fault in her, but at times it became annoyingly inconvenient. Bink himself never let trouble bar him from a matter of principle. Still, Sabrina was beautiful, and he had caused her trouble enough already tonight. He turned to accompany her away from the tree. Hey, no fair, a voice exclaimed. They're going away. Justin must have tattled, another cried. Then let's chop down Justin. Bink halted again. They wouldn't, he said. Of course they wouldn't, Sabrina agreed. Justin is a village monument. Ignore them. But the voice of the tree came again, a bit misplaced in relation to Bink and Sabrina. Evidence of poor concentration. Friends, please fetch the king quickly. These ruffians have an axe or something, and they've been eating loco berries. An axe! Sabrina exclaimed in sheer horror. The king is out of town, Bink muttered. Anyway, he's senile, and he hasn't been summoned more than a summer shower in years, Sabrina agreed. Kids didn't dare make so much mischief when he had his full magic. We certainly didn't, Bink said. Remember the hurricane flanked by 6 tornadoes he summoned to put down the last wiggle spawning? He was a real storm king then. He There was the ringing of sound of metal biting into the wood. A scream of sheer agony erupted from the air. Bink and Sabrina jumped. That's Justin, she said. They're doing it. No time for the king anyway, Bink said. He charged to the tree. Bink, you can't, Sabrina cried after him. You don't have any magic. So the truth came out in the moment of crisis. She didn't really believe he had talent. I've got muscle, though, he yelled back. You go for help. Justin screamed again as the blade struck a second time. It was an eerie, wooden noise. Okay, Pierce, yeah. There was laughter, the merry mirth of 2 kids out on a lark, having no care at all what consequences their actions might have. Loco, this was mere insensitivity. Then Bink was there, and he was alone. Just when he was in the mood for a good fight, the malicious pranksters had scattered. He could guess their identities, but he didn't have to. Jama, Zinc, and Potiphar, Justin Tree said. Oh, oh, my foot. Bink squatted to inspect the cut. The white wood wound was clearly visible in contrast to the shoe-like bark of the base of the tree trunk. Driblets of reddish sap were forming, very much like blood. Not too serious for a tree this size, but surely extremely uncomfortable. I'll get some compresses for that, Bink said. There's some coral sponge in the forest near here. Yell if anybody bothers you while I'm gone. I will, Justin said. Hurry. Then as an afterthought, you're a great guy, Bink. Much better than someone who than some who have magic, Bink finished for him. Thanks for trying to spare my feelings. Justin meant well, but sometimes spoke before he thought. It came from having a wooden brain. It isn't fair that louts like Jama are called citizens, while you... Thanks, Binks said gruffly, moving off. He agreed completely, but what was the use talking about it? He watched out for anyone lurking in the bushes, waiting to bother Justin when the tree was unprotected, but saw nobody. They were really gone. Jama, Zink, and Potiphar, he thought darkly, the village troublemakers. Jama's talent was the manifestation of a sword, and that was what had chopped Justin's trunk. Anyone who could imagine that such vandalism was funny. Vink remembered one of his own bitter experiences with that bunch not so many years ago. Intoxicated by loco berries, the three had lurked in ambush across along one of the paths beyond the village, just looking for a mischief. Vink and a friend had walked into that trap and had been backed up against the cloud of poison gas that was Potiphar's magic talent, while Zink made mirage holes near their feet, and Jama materialized flying swords for them to duck. Some sport. Vink's friend had used his magic to escape, animating a golem from a stick of wood that took his place. The golem had resembled him exactly, so that it fooled the pranksters. Vink had known the difference, of course, but he had covered for his friend. Unfortunately, though the golem was immune to poison gas, Vink was not. He had inhaled some of it and lost consciousness even as help arrived. His friend had brought Vink's mother and father. Vink had found himself holding his breath again as the poison cloud enveloped him. He saw his mother tugging at his father's arm, pointing Vink's way. Bianca's talent was replay. She could jump time back 5 seconds in a small area. This was very limited, but deviously powerful magic, for it enabled her to correct a just made mistake, such as Brink's breath of poison gas. Then his breath had whooshed out again, making Bianca's magic useless. She could keep replaying the scene indefinitely, but everything was replayed, including his breath. But Roland looked piercingly, and Bink had frozen. Roland's talent was to stun gaze. One special glance, and what he looked at was frozen in place, alive but immobile until released. In this manner, Bink had been prevented from breathing the gas a second time, until his rigid body had been carried out. As the stun abated, he had found himself in his mother's arms. "Oh, my baby," she cried, cradling his head against her bosom. "Did they hurt you?" Came to an abrupt stop by the bed of sponge, his face flushing even now with the keen embarrassment of the memory. And she had to do that. Certainly she had saved him from an early death, but he had been the laughing stock of the entire village for an interminable time thereafter. Everywhere he went, kids exclaimed, "My baby!" in falsetto and sniggered. He had his life at the expense of his pride. Yet he knew he could not blame his parents. He had blamed Jama and Zink and Potiphar. Bink had no magic, but perhaps for that reason, he was the huskiest boy in the village. He had to fight as long as he could remember. He was not especially well coordinated, but he had a lot of raw power. He had gone after Jama privately and demonstrated convincingly that the fist was swifter than the magic sword, then Zink, and finally Potiphar. Bink had hurled him into his own gas cloud, forcing him to dissolve it very suddenly. Those three had not sniggered at Bink thereafter. In fact, they tended to avoid him, which was why they had scattered when he charged the tree. Together they could have overcome him, but they had been well conditioned by those separate encounters. Bink smiled, his embarrassment replaced by grim pleasure. Perhaps his manner of dealing with the situation had been immature, but there had been a lot of satisfaction in it. Down underneath, he knew it had been his irritation at his mother that motivated him, displaced to people like Jama, but he did not regret it. He did love his mother after all. But in the end, his only chance to redeem himself had been to find his own magic talent, a good strong one like that of his father, Roland, so no one would dare tease him or laugh at him or baby him ever again, so that pure shame would not drive him from Xanth. And that had never happened. He was known contemptuously as the spellless wonder. He stooped to gather good, strong sponges. They would abate Justin Tree's discomfort, for that was their magic. They absorbed agony and spread a healing comfort. A number of plants and animals, he was not quite sure in which category the sponges fit, had similar properties. The advantage of the sponges was that they were mobile. Plucking them would not kill them. They were tough. They had migrated from the water when the corals did, and now thrived on land. I just want to say, Piers Anthony, man, this guy's got it. Off the chain. Like the things people would like make a big deal out of that, how the corals came back to migrated onto land, and he just talks about it like it was Tuesday. I mean, granted, because Nance is a crazy place, but still, this guy's mind is wild. Uh, Probably their magic healing properties have been developed to facilitate their lives in the new medium, or maybe before the migration, since Coral was cutting stuff. Talents tend to run in schools, with one overlapping another. Thus, many variants of each type of magic showed up in the plant and animal kingdoms. But among people, magic varied extremely widely. It seemed that individual personality had more to do with it than heredity, though the strongest magic tended to turn up in particular family lines, as the strength of magic was hereditary, while type of magic was environmental. Yet there were other factors. Bing could fit a lot of reflection into a passing moment. If reflection were magic, he'd be a magician. But right now, he'd better concentrate on what he was doing, or he'd be in trouble. Dusk was intensifying. Dismal shapes were rising out of the forest, hovering as if seeking prey. Eyeless and formless, they nevertheless conducted themselves with a disquieting awareness, orienting on Bink, or seeming to. More magic was unexplained than was safely catalogued. A will o' the wisp caught Bink's nervous eye. He started to follow the half glimpsed light, then abruptly caught himself. The lure of the wisp was sheer mischief. It would lead him into the wilderness and lose him there, prey to the hostile magic of the unknown. One of Bink's childhood friends had followed the wisp and never returned. Warning enough. Night transforms Xanth. Regions like this one that were innocent by day became horrors as the sun sneaked down. Specters and shades came out, questing for their ghastly satisfactions, and occasionally a zombie ripped free of its grave and marched clumsily about. No sensible person slept outdoors, and every house in the village had repulsion spells against the supernatural. Bink did not dare use the shortcut back to Justin Tree. He would have to go the long way, following the looping but magically protected trails. This was not timidity, but necessity. He ran, not from fear, for there was no real danger on this charmed route, and he knew the paths too well to stray accidentally from them, but in order to reach Justin more swiftly. Justin's flesh was wood, but it hurt every bit as much as normal flesh. How could anybody, how could anyone be so crass as to chop at just a tree? Bink passed a field of sea oats, hearing the pleasant swish and gurgle of their oceanic tides. When harvested, they made excellent foamy broth, except that it tended to be rather salty. The bowls could only be filled halfway, otherwise the broth's continuing sea waves slopped over. He remembered the wild oats he had planted as an adolescent. Sea oats were restless, but their cousins, the wild oats, were hyperactive. They had fought him savagely, their stems slashing across his wrists as he tried to harvest a ripe ear. He had gotten it, but he had been uncomfortably scratched and abraded before getting clear of the patch. He had planted those few wild seeds in a secret plot behind his house and watered them every day, the natural way. He had guarded the bad-tempered shoots from all harm. I don't I don't know what this means, what all this entails. I guess we're supposed to fill in the blanks maybe as to what that means, what he is watering them with, quote quote, the natural way. Anyway, he had guarded the bad-tempered shoots from all harm, his anticipation growing. What an adventure for a teenage male! Until his mother, Bianca, had discovered the plot. Alas, she had recognized the species instantly. There had been a prompt family hassle. How could you? Bianca demanded, her face flaming. But Roland had labored to suppress his admiring smile. Sowing wild oats, he murmured. The lad's growing up. Now, Roland, you know that, dear, it isn't as if there's any real harm in it. No harm, she exclaimed indignantly. It's a perfectly natural urge for a young man. But her furious expression had halted Mink's father, who feared nothing in Xanth, but was normally a peaceable old man. Roland sighed and turned to Bink. I gather you do know what you were doing, son. Mink felt excruciatingly defensive. Well, yes, the nymph of the oats. Bink! Bianca snapped warningly. He had never seen her so angry before. Roland held up his hands, making peace. Dear, why don't you let us work this out, man to man? The boy's got it right. And so Roland had betrayed his own bias. When his man to man chat was with Bink, it was with a boy. Without another word, Bianca had stalked out of the house. Roland turned to Bink, shaking his head in a gesture that was nominally negative. Roland was a powerful, handsome man, and he had a special way with gestures. Genuine wild oats, cold thrashing from the stem, sown by the full moon, watered with your own urine. I guess that's answered. He inquired frankly, and Bink nodded, his face at half heat, so that when the plants mature and the oat nymph manifests, she will be bound to you, the fertilizer figure. Bink nodded grimly. Son, believe me, I comprehend the attraction. I sowed wild oats myself when I was your age. Got me a nymph too, flower and green hair and a body like the great outdoors. But I'd forgotten about the special watering, and so she escaped me. I never saw anything so lovely in my life, except your mother, of course. Roland had sowed wild oats. Bink had never imagined such a thing. He remained silent, afraid of what was coming. I made the mistake of confessing about the oats to Bianca, Roland continued. I fear she became somewhat sensitized on the subject, and you caught the brunt. These things happen. So his mother was jealous of something that had happened in his father's life before he married her. What a pitful of concepts Bink had stumbled into unwittingly. Roland's face had become serious. To a young man, inexperienced, the notion of a lovely, nude, captive nymph may be phenomenally tempting, he continued. All the physical attributes of a real woman, and none of the mental ones. But son, this is a juvenile dream, like finding a candy tree. The reality really would not be all you anticipated. One quickly becomes surfeited, tired of unlimited candy. And so it is, so it also is with a mindless female body. A man cannot love a nymph. She might as well be air. His ardor rapidly turns to boredom and to disgust. Still Bink dared not comment. He would not have become bored. He was sure. Roland understood him too well. Son, what you need is a real live girl, he concluded. A figure with a personality who will talk back to you. It is far more challenging to develop a relationship with a complete woman, and often extremely fatiguing. He glanced meaningfully at the door through which Bianca had departed. But in the long run, it is also far more rewarding. What you sought in the wild oats was a shortcut, but in life there are no shortcuts. He smiled, though if it had been up to me, I'd have let you try the shortcut. No harm in it, no harm in it at all. But your mother, well, we have conservative culture here, and the ladies tend to be the most conservative, especially the pretty ones. It's a small village, smaller than it used to be, so everybody knows his neighbor's business. So we are circumscribed. You know what I mean? Bink nodded uncertainly. When his father laid down the law, however circumspectly, that was final. No more oats. Your mother, well, she was caught by surprise by your growing up. The oats are out. She's probably rooting them up right this instant. But you still have a lot of good experience ahead of you. Bianca might like to think you'd be as a little boy forever, but even she can't fault nature, not for more than 5 seconds. So she'll simply have to go along with it. Roland paused, but Bink was silent again, unsure of what his father was leading up to. There's a girl due to move here from one of the lesser villages, Roland continued. Theoretically, this is for proper schooling, since we have the best centaur schoolmaster in Xanth. But I suspect the underlying reason is that there simply aren't many eligible boys in her village. I understand she has not yet discovered her magic talent. She's about your age. He paused to glance meaningfully at Bink. I think she would use I think she could use a handsome, healthy young man to show her around and warn her of local hazards. I understand she is extremely smart and pretty, and soft spoken, a rare combination. Then Bink began to understand. A girl, a real girl, for him to get to know. One who would not be prejudiced by his lack of magic. And Bianca would not be able to disapprove, though privately she might dislike the fact of Bink's newly masculine drives. His father, had given him a viable option. Suddenly, he realized he could do without wild oats. Her name is Sabrina, Roland said. A light ahead brought Bink back to the present. Someone was standing by Justin Tree, holding a magic lamp. It's all right, Bink, Justin's voice said in the air beside him. Sabrina brought help, but it wasn't needed. Did you get the sponge? I got it, Bink said. So his little adventure had been no adventure at all, just like his life. As Sabrina helped him pack the sponge around Justin's wound, Bink realized that he had decided he could not go on this way, a non-entity. He would go on to see the good magician Humphrey and learn what his own magic talent was. He glanced up. His eyes caught those of Sabrina, glowing by the light of the lamp. She smiled. She was even more lovely now than she had been when he first met her so many years ago, when they had both been adolescents, and she'd always been true to him. There was no question. Bink's father had been correct about the advantages, frustrations of a real live girl. Now it was up to Bink to do what he had to do to become a real live man.